I want to welcome everyone to November's virtual Flash Talk with the Kelsey Museum Conservation Laboratory virtual tour with the Kelsey Museum conservators, Suzanne Davis and Caroline Roberts. Today, in celebration of Ask a Conservator Day, Suzanne and Carrie will give a virtual tour of the Kelsey's Conservation Lab in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they will provide a brief look at its field laboratories in Abydos, Egypt, and Jebel Barkal, Sudan. Today's presentation will last about 15 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A with you, our audience. And in order to carry that out, you can put your questions in the chat and I will facilitate them, or you can use the raised hand emoji and I will call on you. But now I will turn it over to our Kelsey Museum conservators, Suzanne Davis and Caroline Roberts. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'm really happy to see all of you here. I am going to share my screen. My name is Suzanne, and I'll introduce myself properly in a second. So there's going to be like a little moment of awkwardness as I do the screen sharing transfer here. And then we are going to open this talk and view it as a slideshow. Okay, and Stephanie, would you let me know if you can see that okay? Okay, great.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay,
Great.
wonderful. Okay, so hi, thanks for joining us for the virtual tour of the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology's Conservation Laboratory. My name is Suzanne Davis, and I'm here with my friend and fellow conservator, Carolyn Roberts. And if you have your little videos up, you might see her waving there. So she's sitting right next to me, actually. So we're pleased to offer this virtual tour of the Kelsey's Conservation Lab in celebration of Ask a Conservator Day, which is like a national event where we celebrate conservation. And so I want to tell you, if you haven't been here before, the Kelsey Museum is part of the University of Michigan, and we have two beautiful buildings on U of M's central campus in Ann Arbor. These buildings are named Newberry and Upjohn after the families that donated funds for their construction. And that's important because I'll talk about the Newberry building quite a bit. The conservation department has always been housed in the building that you see on the left, and that is the Newberry building. So it is a beautiful Richardsonian Romanesque building. It was built in the late 1880s for a cost of about $37,000. Its first function was to house the Student Christian Association, but in 1928, the archaeological collections that were begun by Francis Kelsey began to be stored here, and in 1937, the university bought the building from the Student Christian Association for the price of $1. So it's a pretty good deal, I think. And conservation has a really long history at the Kelsey, starting with the inception of the collection and Kelsey fieldwork that was happening in the 1920s and 1930s. And between 1928, when the collections moved here, and the 1960s, conservation work, which was primarily cleaning, was happening mostly in the basement. And I know about it happening particularly in two rooms in the basement, and you're seeing those now. The one on the left is our security office, and you see Officer Nick Roosh there. And also the bioarchaeology and zooarchaeology lab, which is kind of next door to that. And you see that on the right. And there is a graduate student, Bailey, kind of in the far back behind the skeleton there. You can like enjoy finding her in the back there. So these are really cozy, quirky spaces. They're kind of fun spaces, but they're not well ventilated, and they're not especially well suited to the use of solvents or analytical chemistry. So thankfully, in the 1970s, a group that I am going to call the Dream Team comes on the scene. They are led by archaeologist and brand new museum director, John Griffiths Pedley. You see him at the back there circled. This group also includes a couple of young rock stars. So if you know the Kelsey, you'll know these these women, Elaine Gazda on the right and Sharon Herbert on the left, and both of them later become directors of the museum. But at this moment in time, 1975, we care mostly about Pedley and about Amy Rosenberg, who you see circled at the lower left there. So Pedley had worked at the British Museum and the Fogg Art Museum at Harvard, and when he agreed to become director of the Kelsey, he made his acceptance contingent on the university establishing a salary line for a professional conservator. And I actually hold that line today, but the first person hired into it was Amy. At the time, she was a recent graduate of the University College London's new training program in archaeological conservation, and she professionalized the practice of conservation at the Kelsey Museum. So her lab, you didn't know you were going to get a virtual tour of like conservation labs through time, but you are at the Kelsey. So Amy's lab was located in this really nice sunny space on the museum's second floor. It's kind of in the front of the building. And that space today is broken into two different offices. Alex Zwinak's office on the left, he's the graduate coordinator for the interdepartmental program in ancient Mediterranean art and archaeology. You see him smiling there with a big pile of phones next to him that we are getting rid of because they're kind of obsolete now. And then the right part of that lab is now the office of the Kelsey Museum's chief administrator, Tamiko Moore, who has an extremely clean office. So I hope you are impressed by that. I was pretty freaking impressed by it. So the Conservation Lab doesn't occupy this space anymore because in the 1980s, museum director Elaine Gazda she was part of that early 70s dream team. So she raised funds to renovate and modernize much of the Newberry building, turning it into a better place to store and work with museum artifacts. And part of that renovation involved adding a third floor inside the building. And that is where our beautiful penthouse laboratory is today. This is a lovely photo of it taken by a professional photographer. This was first built in the mid 1990s, and it was renovated about 15 years ago as part of a building campaign that also constructed the Upjohn exhibit wing. And that was under Sharon Herbert's direction as director. I started work at the Kelsey in 2001. I had fallen in love with archaeological conservation in the mid 1990s when I spent a summer in graduate school working on this absolutely beautiful island of Samothrace, Greece, on an archaeological excavation. And when I came to the Kelsey after doing a few years working in underwater archaeology for the US Navy, I really felt like I had come home, like back to the world of the ancient Mediterranean. I have been here for 22 years. I am still learning. I find my work fascinating. I love coming to work every day, and I love seeing my colleague Carrie Roberts. You see her on the left there in this photo, and you can see a few views of our laboratory from here. So the big photo on the left is what it looks like when you're walking into the space. And then in that space, we really use it as like kind of like a workshop and officey type of space. And then if you turn to the right, you can head into the next room. And that room, and you can see that view of like walking into that room on the right there. And that room, we really use that for wet chemistry. And there is also a little nook in this room, kind of in the back of that room, where we have a little mini photograph and imaging studio for photography. And so I want to try to use my cursor, which I hope you can see. I want to just point out like a few key features of this space. So people always ask about these jobbies right here. These are exhaust. They pull down over our lab tables for like local exhaust when we're working with chemicals or solvents on the bench. If we go behind those a little bit and you see this blue thing here, this is a fume hood or a fume cupboard. And it's for when we really, really don't want to breathe what we're working with. So we work with it inside that cupboard with a big exhaust fan turned on. It exhausts out the roof of the building. And we can pull this sash down so we don't breathe any of that stuff. Along this back bench here, we have a couple of microscopes. This guy right here is an optical stereo microscope. It's super nice. We can cable it into a computer and do measurements and take beautiful photos with it. And then over here, kind of shrouded by this cover, we have a polarized light microscope, an Olympus microscope. And we'll show you a little bit more about those in a bit. We also have a lab oven here. We do accelerated aging testing to make sure that the materials that we use in our exhibition spaces, like paint, fabric, mount materials, we do accelerated aging of those to make sure that they won't deteriorate the ancient objects that we're going to put on view with those materials. Coming into the front here, there's like another little microscope here, quite cute, that goes right into a computer. It's called a Dino Light. And then, you know what? I didn't show you one safety feature that's pretty important. Over here in the corner, we have a shower, a safety shower, in case we accidentally splash ourselves with, acid or something caustic, God forbid. Hasn't happened yet, but you never know. So, and then like, I don't want to forget this disco ball here. This is a gift from a former Kelsey employee, Todd Gehring. And we have a spinner and lights on this thing. And when we want to celebrate something, like we published an article or we're just feeling kind of like a lack of energy, we do have brief dance parties under our disco ball. So, uh, let's see. Okay, so I told you about, let's take my mouse, my cursor off the screen now. We don't need that anymore. I told you about falling in love with archaeological conservation in Samothrace, Greece, but my colleague Carrie really fell in love with it here at the Kelsey. And so at this point, I was going to turn over the talk to her, but she is just on the very tail end of a cold and she doesn't want to start coughing. So I am going to keep going. So Carrie came to the Kelsey 12 years ago. She was fresh out of graduate school at the time, and she came to work with the Pteranothes stele. And this is a collection of about 200 painted limestone grave markers from a Roman Egyptian cemetery. Carrie was at the time preparing for a career in archaeological conservation, and that excited her because she knew it would allow her to work in other countries, to be part of teams making new discoveries, and to take care of artifacts that can tell us how regular people, like not kings and queens, but just normal people, lived in antiquity. So many of these artifacts, like the stela that's shown here on the left, they are in serious need of conservation. And in many cases, what's causing them to deteriorate often isn't immediately clear. So Carrie spent her first year at the Kelsey, like doing a lot of investigation of the problems for these objects and developing a preservation plan for them. And in the process of doing that, she discovered an exciting and unusual green pigment on one of them, and it was green earth. Like, I don't want to, like, I realize we don't say that anywhere in this presentation, so I just want to tell you what it was. But anyway, that really inspired her to undertake a multi-year research project to study color pigments on ancient artifacts. Research has been a top strategic priority for the Conservation Lab over the past 10 years. And part of our work for this has been to build our scientific research capacity. So one of our biggest recent additions to the lab has been this Bruker tracer X-ray fluorescence, or I'm going to call it XRF for short. We can do elemental analysis with this. We wrote a National Endowment for the Humanities grant for this piece of equipment because it costs $40,000. And that price tag is pretty far over our lab's small annual operating budget of $2,000. We chose this particular machine because it's relatively affordable compared to other kinds of analytical instruments. And because it's non-destructive, we don't have to take a sample from our precious ancient objects in order to do the work. So this machine allows us to study how artifacts were made, what they were made of, and for the NEH grant, we are specifically looking at what pigments and dyes were used to decorate them. So on the left, you see recent material science major Harrison Biggs working with Carrie, sorry, Harrison and Carrie are using the XRF unit to analyze blue pigment on a Pteranothes stela. And at the center and at the right, we are looking at color on a toy horse in the middle and a limestone inscription on the right. We are also equipped with a range of microscopes, which we use to look for traces of pigment. We look at fibers with them as well. We use them to identify forms of artifact deterioration, and we use them to clean small artifacts, like, for example, coins. We don't want to scratch the coin when we're removing corrosion. We really love the microscope that you see on the left. It's the little Dynalite microscope. You can hold it in your hand or you can put it on a little stand, which you see there looking at that super cute little dog. And it goes, right into the computer. You can see on the laptop screen there uh, a visual on the screen of what Carrie was looking at with that at the time. So you can also stick it over an object at any angle and you get this live view on the computer screen. So in the middle, we have middle photo there, we have an Olympus polarized light microscope. This is probably our lab's oldest instrument, but it is still super valuable to us. We use it for pigment and fiber identification. And then all the way on the right, you know what? I just realized, can you see, Stephanie, can you just nod for me if you can see all the way to the right of the screen, or do you see like the little zoom heads over
No, I
there?
can see everything.
Okay,
It's
wonderful.
looking great. Yeah.
Okay, because I just realized I can see attendees on the right of the screen, and I was worried that that might be covering images for you. Okay,
Oh,
so on
yeah.
the right, you see um, a view from our newly acquired Leica microscope. And so what you're looking at is a 160 times view of a painted wood panel from Kuranes, Egypt. And if you look really closely, you can see those kind of brighter um, little chunks, for lack of a better word, in the figure's collar. And those are the pigment orpiment, which gives like a really sparkly gold color. So it's pretty nice to use to show like jewelry when you were doing paintings in the ancient world, Egypt specifically. Okay, so uh, unlike labs in some larger museums, like city museums, fancy museums like the Detroit Institute of Arts, Carrie and I do all of our own in-house photography, including multispectral imaging. Multispectral imaging, I'm going to call it MSI for short. This is a photographic technique that can be used to identify certain pigments and dyes. And it's a research that we've used a lot recently and also during our NEH grant project to look at ancient color. And so here you are looking at a visible induced infrared luminescence image of Pteroneuthis stela 21169. And here MSI is being used to identify the presence of the pigment Egyptian blue on multiple areas of this limestone grave marker from Pteroneuthis, Egypt. And as you can see, looking at the visible image on the left, like that's not really that apparent to your naked eye, but with MSI, we're able to see where the ancient artist was using this blue pigment. All right. MSI makes use of different filters, different lens filters that you see those kind of lined up along that bench on the left, and you see me in the background there. So it uses different lens filters and light sources to capture an image of an object at specific light wavelengths. And I'm going to play for you now a time-lapse video of IPMA PhD candidate Laurel Fricker, who's on the call today. And you can just watch her doing it. Um, if this plays, here we go. All right. So, as you're watching her, you can see that it involves some special maneuvers uh, and some pieces of equipment to make it work. But we really love this technique. It's affordable, it's portable, so we can take it into the field on archaeological excavations if we want to. It is completely non-destructive. You're just capturing the information with a camera. So it is very useful for us here. At the Kelsey, though, it's not all research in the conservation lab. We also use our photo setup to document artifacts just as part of our day-to-day work for the museum. So things that are going to be used in classes, that are going to go on exhibition, and that are going to travel for loans. Oh, let's see. Let me see if I can. There we go. Did I skip one? Okay, thanks, Carrie. Um, so our work, which, like as I said, includes preparing things for exhibition and loan and classes, that sometimes involves carrying out stabilization treatments on artifacts. You see Carrie doing that on the left. Condition checks for things, especially that are going to be handled by students. You see Carrie doing that on the right. We also check objects to make sure they're safe for display and for travel. Travel can be pretty stressful for ancient objects. It can be pretty stressful for me. I'm only like 51 years old, but when you're several thousand years old, it can be even harder. We also document artifacts that are being handled by students just in case of any damage, because sometimes accidents happen. Right now, we're focused on preparing artifacts for display in the Kelsey's planned Byzantine and Islamic galleries, and that's what you see on all the way on the right with this great big basin. We also do a lot of preventive conservation where we try to prevent damage before it occurs. And we do this by keeping a close eye on temperature and humidity levels in collection storage and in display environments. And an older little piece of equipment that we still use is this little hobo data logger. So it logs temperature and humidity data, and then we can download that to our computers. That's what you see on the left in that drawer there. And Carrie also manages our integrated pest management program. So she watches insect and rodent activity in the museum because sometimes those creatures, certain creatures, will really kind of chow down on your ancient materials, and obviously we don't want that. We also do a lot of writing of both technical reports and grant applications. So we do spend a lot of time with our computers, with writing, looking at objects for that work, and also working with spreadsheets, especially budgets. Grant writing is an especially important part of the work that we do to support Kelsey Museum field projects and conservation on those archaeological projects in the field. The Kelsey Museum has a really long history of supporting excavation projects. It dates back to, um, we actually had conservation in the very earliest Kelsey field projects. But Kelsey conservators were traveling to excavation projects, like even under Pedley's directorship in the 70s. So today, our support work includes the project at the Abydos Middle Cemetery, the Notian Archaeological Project in Turkey, and the Jebel Barkal project in Sudan. And I'll just talk about Abydos and Jebel Barkal. You see the Abydos Dig House in Abydos, Egypt here on the screen. And that's where our lab is. Our lab is in the back of this house. You see a view of that lab here. It has running water, it has electricity, it has lights, it has fans, all really important. It has window shutters. You'll see those later, which is important when the afternoon wind blows sand through the lab. It's nice to be able to close those. We also have several fantastic Egyptian conservation colleagues, including Iman Zidan, shown here on my left, and Hamada Sadek. We do work with other Egyptian conservators as well, but these are the two colleagues that we work with most frequently, especially Hamada on the right. So at Abydos, we work a lot with organic objects like cartonnage and wood. You see some wood on the table here. And I just want to show you a few more views of our space. You see Iman hard at work there with some cartonnage, and Hamada is working again with some wood. We also do quite a bit of work with painted limestone blocks at Abydos, so like carved and painted limestone relief blocks. And here you see Hamada with conservator Ahmed Abdullah preparing inscribed limestone blocks for exhibition at the Sohag National Museum in Egypt. So going now to Jebel Barkal, Sudan, this is a view over the site. Our work is actually on the opposite side of the site, but this view is really spectacular, I think, because of the pyramids in the foreground. And you can see Jebel Barkal, the holy mountain there in the middle, and then the Nile kind of like near the horizon in the background there. We have a small office in the Jebel Barkal Visitor Center, and our office is actually it's this little window right here. I discovered when I was making this talk that I have never taken a photo of the inside of that office. Sorry about that. It's not that interesting, so you're not missing a whole lot. That's where we keep our computers and paperwork and have little like stand-up meetings in the morning. Um, you can see here a couple of nice features also, which are these super cute little guard dogs. They are very nice and they are relaxing there in the morning sun. So at Jebel Barkal, most of our actual conservation work is with architecture, so it's happening on site. And this year we were there in January and February, and we were working primarily in this temple, which dates to around like 600-ish BCE. It has a range of dates, but that's, kind of like a good point in time. We have a bunch of really close Sudanese colleagues at Jebel Barkal, including Conservator El Montasser Dafala. He is my closest counterpart on the project, and we plan our work together. He likes to wrap up against the cold winter wind with this fetching head wrap, and I just think it looks awesome on him. So I took this photo. You see El Montasser again in the yellow t-shirt at the far left with this block and tackle. Um, big orange hook kind of in the foreground. And then standing along the wall there of the temple are our colleagues Sufyan Mutwakil, who is a conservation builder, El Hassan Ahmed Mohammed, who is an archaeologist and a very senior team member, and conservation architect David Flory. And they are discussing right now, or we are discussing, except that I was taking the photo, resetting some of the fallen blocks in this temple. And so that is the end of our virtual tour of the Kelsey Museum Conservation Lab, sort of through time and at two of our field projects. And if you want to learn more about conservation or like lend your support to conservation activities, you can visit the website of the American Institute for Conservation, and the QR code will take you straight there, or you can Google it. And I am going to stop sharing now, and Carrie and I are happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Um, Now we will enter the question portion of the program. And so if you use the hand emoji to raise your hand, I'll go ahead and call on you and facilitate the questions. You can also put those in the chat and I can read those out as well.
I realize I think I went over time, so if you don't have questions, that's also fine.
Tutor. Tutor is a
Yeah.
Kelsey attendant here. Go ahead.
So here in this talk, you were talking about some of the stuff with the Nile and more Egyptian archaeology, but what other ongoing projects do you have? Like, for example, I know there's a project within South Sudan, in Sudan at least, that you have.
Yes, so the Jebel Barkal project, which I showed at the end, is in Sudan, and it's in North Sudan. It's about like 500 kilometers north of Khartoum. And it is a really interesting project. It's led by archaeologist Jeff Emberling from the U of M side, and it's a joint project with the National Corporation of Antiquities and Museums. And Al Hassan, who you saw in that slide, is the co-director of that from the NCAM side. And that project is sort of doing three different things. It's investigating the ancient city at Jebel Barkal, settlement archaeology. I mean, people in Sudan have really focused on like palaces and royal cemeteries. And so Jeff is interested in looking at, and El Hassan are interested in looking at the ancient city there. And this particular project actually discovered the location of that ancient city. So it's a big deal for Sudanese archaeology. And so another kind of prong of the project is conservation at the site. The site has been investigated for about 100 years, but there really hasn't been much investment in conservation of the temples um, or the pyramids. And of course, the city now, like we're just looking at the city for the first time. So that'll be a concern too. And then the third part of that project is to really have a really robust kind of community collaborative aspect to the work where we are working and talking with people who live in the area around the archaeological site to learn from them and to hopefully make the visitor center there kind of also a community center where people can be learning and, maybe having things like art shows and just have it be like like not just a tourist destination, but a more vibrant part of the community.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that answered your question, Tutor.
No, it's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. We actually have a question in the chat from Laurel Fricker, one of our IPAMA students here at the Kelsey. So Laurel asks, are there any other tools or devices that you wish the lab had to help with your conservation work?
Yes. So we wish that the lab had, there's a specific type of analysis um, that can look at organic materials. So you have to take small samples for this to work. It's called FTIR, um, which I'm going to remember the first part of that correctly, but maybe not all of the acronym. But it can look, for example, at binding media for paints. So that, we would be interested in that. And it can also look at like in the ancient world, people often are using like waxes or gums to attach things. Like if you're going to put in like an inlay for an eye for a statue, you're using a wax or a gum sometimes. So like we're interested in that technique. We're also interested in um, fiber optic reflectance spectroscopy or FORS, which can do a little bit more precise identification of pigments and dyes. And that also requires a small sample and then but not huge. And then there are some interesting techniques that might be possible, but I don't know the size, but like there are some new laser analysis techniques like Raman, and those can be non-destructive. So, we're dreaming big.
Great, thank you. So we have two other questions in the chat. I'm going to go with our Roman art curator here, Nicola Barnum, and she says, what is the most difficult conservation challenge that you have ever encountered?
Nicola, that is a really good question. Okay, it might be a different answer for each of us, but for me, it was definitely in Sudan at the site of El Kuru. I worked on preservation of graffiti in an ancient temple, and the graffiti were being like worn away over time from the action of wind, like wind-blown sand. They were carved into these sandstone. It was a sandstone rock-cut temple, and with ancient graffiti that we think were important as part of like the temple was part of an ancient pilgrimage site. And so the graffiti themselves are pretty important, and we were losing them over time. Also, the sandstone was cracking and spalling, and pieces were falling off. But the chemical treatments that you could do to preserve this kind of stone were really hard to access in Sudan. Like you couldn't buy the chemicals in Sudan. It was just incredibly difficult to ship the chemicals to Sudan. And then, in conservation, there's this really long history of people treating stuff with chemicals. And then, like 20, 30 years later, you find out that it was just a terrible idea. Like, they're just causing all kinds of new problems. And we try to, like science is a lot better now than it was, for example, in the 1940s. So we have more information, but with the class of chemicals that we were thinking about using, we were starting to hear anecdotal reports from sites in the American Southwest and on the west coast of the country, like in Los Angeles, where 20 years after application, they were starting to see problems with this stuff. So I just like ended up in this space where I felt like there was nothing good that we could do. One option was to construct a roof over the temple. We didn't really want to do that for various reasons. Roofs themselves can cause problems. But like in the end, that is the route that we ended up going. But that was like years of research and feeling like really powerless. So that was my hardest thing that I've had to deal with.
Thank you. So we have a couple other questions. Natasha Levitt says, are there opportunities for students to get involved with conservation at the Kelsey?
Yes, there are. We are a little bit selective about doing that, but if you write us, like my address is on the Kelsey's website. If you write me and Carrie, we can talk to you about making that happen.
Great. We have our next question is from Dave Kehoe, a docent here at the Kelsey Museum. To what degree do other university areas, specifically chemistry, support your efforts with things like FTIR or GCMS?
David
MS.
is a chemist, I think, or a
Yes, I am a
scientist.
chemist.
Yes. So we do work with chemistry sometimes. We also work, like you probably know, there's like a central campus laboratory where we can do things like SEM, EDS. So with chemistry, I don't think that we have tried to do FTIR or GCMS. We have done Raman with chemistry in the past, and that was really helpful. I did that on a project years ago working with curator Margaret Root to look at the mineral compositions of stamp seals from Iraq. Uh, and we haven't explored it that much, but it's something with FTIR or GCMS, like as you can probably appreciate, scientists at University of Michigan, they have their own research projects and they, have busy schedules. So you have to really find the right match between the scientist or the graduate student and, in chemistry where your research interests align and you can do the work together. But I think it's something that we should pursue.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
And then looks like we have one more from Marcus. How do you pick your projects and how many different projects do you have going on currently at the Kelsey in total?
So a lot of our work is driven by what's happening with our exhibitions program. So we do research, we're doing work for exhibitions, for loans, and for classes. We also, we have faculty curators here at the Kelsey, and they sometimes have research interests that we can help them with from a technical perspective. And so we might work with them on things. With the field projects, it's really about the problems and the needs of the archaeological projects. So our work, it's kind of like determined by what's going on at those different projects. And then we also try to have, one, maybe two kind of our own research projects going on kind of in the background. And right now, for us, that's really this ancient color investigation project. So like a personal goal for me is to only have like 3 major projects at any one time, but it usually works out to be, more like 7 to 10. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, and I see like a part of that question was also the Kelsey in total, and I don't think I could answer that for the Kelsey in total because we have so many different researchers working here.
Thank you, everyone. I guess I'll put out a last call for questions. And if no one else has any other questions, we will wrap up. And I just want to thank Suzanne and Carrie for their continued work here at the Kelsey and for presenting today for our Flash Talk. This was incredibly interesting. Thank you so much. And for our next Flash Talk in December, keep an eye out on our website and we will post the information there.
Thank you, everybody, for your super nice comments in the chat. We appreciate them.
Thanks, everybody.